Very pleased to see so many of you. Very pleased to welcome Stuart Walmsley of the Bedford and Milton Keynes Waterways Trust. This is a dream for many of us as boaters, the thought of being able to go from London to York in a wide beam. What a wonderful thing that would be, or even just to do a new loop going through Bedford and back through the Fens, etc. That would be really great. Anybody, if you want to ask questions this evening, if you can post them under questions and answers, use the chat facility by all means, but if you post a question there's a very strong probability that it won't get asked. So please put your questions in Q&A and keep the chat just for general comments, etc. Stuart, I'm going to hand over to you. I ask you to do an introduction. I'm sure you can introduce yourself far better than I'm able to. Stuart, good evening, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you everyone for listening in tonight. Dave has kindly asked me to give you a discussion presentation on the Bedford Milton Keynes Waterway Park that is for some time now been planned, developed, and in some way hopefully will be seen in its entirety at some point in the future. So tonight what I'd like to do is to give you an understanding of what it is, where it goes, a bit of the history around it, how it started to, how it began its journey, I suppose, in a way that it did. Look at the challenges that it faces, particularly with the route that it's taken. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this section of the region, which is Milton Keynes to Bedford, and it's one of the most congested, I think, now regions in terms of development and transport, and the way it's looking going forward is potentially going to be a particularly busy corridor, and one that will be in the foreseeable future a very different looking place, and one hopes with the Waterway Park through it a much more pleasant place to be, and that's the intention of it. So the idea is to go through some of the engineering problems that we face, that we're potentially going to face with it, the economic challenges that present us in developing the project, the program, how does the program work, and whether and over what sort of time frame are we talking about, the partnerships that exist within the group, and what we call a consortium of players involved in the development of it. So we'll go through, I'll take you through all of the governance of it, the development of it, the planning of it, liaison of it, and the build of it as well. And along the way, I'll introduce you to some of the people involved and to show how, in fact, this project is potentially one of the most, is the biggest one that of its kind, Waterway Park, that I certainly know about, and certainly within England as a major infrastructure project. So we'll go through the slides in some way. First of all, if I could perhaps introduce myself and give you an idea of how I got involved in the Waterway Park. It wasn't more than a couple of years ago. I was still working actively in industry. My background is in engineering, civil engineering, major infrastructure. Been involved at all levels of government, working on some of the big projects that you will probably notice in the regions around the southeast of London. So great, a wealth of experience in understanding the difficulties and the constraints involved when you're dealing with major infrastructure projects. And I attended a conference sometime a couple of years ago about just how infrastructure was going and the future, the direction it was going in, and who was going to be involved and how it was going to work. And I was struck by one presentation by the chair of the Waterway, Bedford Milton Keynes. The chair was Jane Hamilton, and she took us all through a journey which was very different to the one that we were used to, and one that struck me as, well, actually, there's something here that has got some of the answers to many of the problems that we face. And I was particularly struck by just how much of an impression that made on people as a result of it. Once I retired, which is very recently, I approached Jane and I asked whether in fact I could play some part, volunteer and help in some way. I felt still valued enough that I could perhaps operate a little bit more strategically as opposed to working with the spade and shovel, but nevertheless that still attracts me in some way, having not had a chance to do that now for many years. And I was delighted that Jane said, yes, we'd love you to join the team and to work with us and perhaps bring some of that expertise in the partnership developments with local regional bodies, Highways England, who I worked with, some of the counties, some of the regional bodies, environmental agency, all of these people I've dealt with in the past and understood the mechanisms in the way that they operate. So I was delighted to be able to come and join the team and in some ways give some guidance as to how things could work in a way that a project of this size and scale and the complexities of it and the way it operates within a particularly, as I say, congested corridor could operate, and how it could in fact enormously introduce a much higher value of a well-being, a much more sort of attractive environment. It's not just about building roads, it's not just about building railways. There is actually an alternative, and sometimes the alternative can give you a much greater reward. Still got the major structures, infrastructure, but something else can give you something more as to value and to offset some of the major type of structures that are working. So I was delighted to be part of the team, and hence that's why I'm here tonight. Jane asked me to give an update, and I'm delighted to do that. I will say I will try and sort of keep the presentation to about 40-45 minutes. If I do go over, I'm sure Dave will slow me or whatever. But and there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. So okay, so if we start and look at how it works. So the trust itself, what is it? Well, it's a charity. So all the people involved in it give their time. And they provide a great deal of expertise from their previous history and their previous enterprises, and bring it to this trust to help develop it. And the trust itself acts as what we call the advocate to it. So it's about how the park can be developed and who would be the right structure, the right people to do that. And the trust itself is seen as the driver, although given the partners involved, it also has a very strong position in facilitating the way that works. So as part of the trust, we've developed a 3-year business plan. And as with all major infrastructure projects, the ones that I've certainly been involved in, a 3-year plan is a good start. Often you'll get longer business plans, but quite honestly, I've always found that it's always the first 3 years that matter, because those are the ones that you're going to grab the attention of politicians, you're going to grab the attention of those developers that are really interested in joining you. So a 3-year business plan has been presented, and this is about how this can work, how it does, and really develops the economic case for the project. It looks at the flood management of the project, how the developments in the Marston Vale in particular, which is the most central part of the project, how that can link into the project. And also how it's over time, and we'll go through the history, but how this project over time has emerged into a much more strategically based project. So in other words, it still relies heavily upon operational ideas, but ultimately it does rely an awful lot on merging itself with what else is going on across the region that has a major impact on that development. And this is the ideal situation of the business plan, is how it links and integrates you into a wider regional plan. And I think that's crucially what the success of this is. So it's largely, I mean, so the trust has is part of another, it's a sister to the group, which is, I don't know if people are aware of this, but this is the enterprise. So it's the Milton Keynes, Bedford Milton Keynes Enterprise Trust, which is and this is the operational side of the organisation. So they run they charter the boats and they generate income, which allows us to develop ideas with consultants and alike through the strategic arm in building a case for doing it. So an extremely important relationship that exists there. And in fact, some of the board meetings that take place do in fact now bring all of those parties together. So we're looking at both strategic and operational, given that the two are so closely linked. It's a group that comprises of 500 members and volunteers. Clearly, we're always looking, well, the board is always looking for wider support from all of the community involved, and so that they're able to bring some other expertise. I mean, as I said before, I brought my expertise to the board, and I'm sure those that would possess similar sorts of skills would equally wish to present themselves in some way. And also the volunteer side of thing on the operational side with the charter boats, and to see in whether there's any a way they can offer and support that. And there are some head of navigation works, reconstruction, regeneration that are also taking place as part of that enterprise side of the operations. So an extremely integrated bunch of people with enormous backgrounds of different skills, which are clearly come forward when it's when you're dealing with such a project of this side. If I may just give you a vision of the project, if you can see, this is the route that's been proposed. Follows mainly the A421 corridor, which is the major road route, linking from the Grand Union Canal in Milton Keynes to the Great River Ooze in Bedford at Kempston. And the heads of water at Kempston is primarily the main starting point of the project. Although Milton Keynes may argue similarly now that they've created a gateway. So there's a great deal of work that started there. But it's a route that takes enormous vision to create, and one that I suppose in a way try to imagine a canal, a waterway, a broad waterway that traverses its way through a narrow corridor of varying topography, varying terrain, and varying development nearby, and how the route will incorporate the topography of the land, the water, the lakes that exist within it, and what will it look like at the end of it? Well, looking at some of the data that we've got, there's Brogba Lake, which is in the Master Moraine and the Waterway Park, as you see there, the two lakes on that side. Anything up to 150 berths proposed. There's 111 moorings and berths located at the Milton Keynes Campbell Parkland end. And there's potential for 43 locks and 19 kilometres of new channel that could potentially be created as a result of this scheme. And on top of all of that, what the benefits are the real opportunities for country walks, cycleways, parallel routes that run alongside the waterway that could in fact link many kilometres of new and existing cycleways linking up these communities. So in other words, a vision that has a real potential to create something in a region that's been scarred from industry for many years and really in need of redevelopment. And I think if you look at it and you look at the sort of the dialogue that takes place, there's a great appetite from the local communities for this sort of project to take place, and some of the developers that are involved are very keen as well, given the potential there for waterfront development. So within the scale of the project, you've got a tremendous opportunity, and the vision of the group, the trust, is one of this is something that can be created and provides a valuable missing link on that waterway network that that will link up, as Dave said earlier, a large part of the southeast region waterways and up to the Great River Ooze and beyond. So tremendous, tremendous opportunity, and with a vision statement, but one that we hope will be a great, great opportunity for the future. If I can just quickly go through the history of this, and I think in a way, some of you will perhaps recognize the pattern here of, well, it started back in 1811. It seems to have been the first time it was looked at. Bedford was always seen as a central point of industry, and there was a good opportunity to provide links to it. All through the sequence of those years, you can see that there was great enthusiasm for it, and then there was not, and then there was, and it's a general pattern of canal building, I think, over that period of time. The cost involved, the logistics, the engineering involved, the enormous challenges that face these early engineers, and sometimes impossible to quantify in any real way. Equally, when you look at the pressures that started to mount, as I said, you had the East-West Rail route developed. Clearly, that gave a greater economic case for that route, weakening the stance of the canal at the time, and so for many years it really did start to sort of evaporate as a credible scheme. And we go right back up to modern times, probably back into 96, I think, when the trust was established, and immediately got involved, started to create the idea, looked at the opportunities that it represented, tremendous foresight really in seeing the value of this as a project, given where it is and the logistics and the planning required to do it. And they were successful in obtaining a lottery bid, which gave them an opportunity to develop some feasibility work, which in essence is a good start, because that allows you to engage consultants, to do some design work, to do some understanding, to do some local planning, and to see whether there are any constraints in the area that would prevent any scheme from going ahead. So there's an awful lot of early work that was done to get to a position of understanding. And I think in a way, a lot of that work has given this project the sort of the foundations in which to take it forward. Crucially, with these projects of this size, and particularly with infrastructure projects, one needs to get a real feel of the terrain and the local plan of the area. And at that time, local authorities were in this process of transitional change, so you ended up having 3 local authorities to deal with as opposed to a county. So you had to learn you had to develop relationships with the 3 main councils on that corridor. And primarily the most important thing when you do into these discussions is to instill this project within their planning framework, so that it's there for developers to see it and to see the opportunities for them when they come to look at their plans. So really one of the early successes, I think, has been about is building this project within the local plans, so it's there for eternity, and it shows that the route is protected. It shows that the line level of the route is one that features highly within the planning aspects of things. And I think when you're dealing with any major infrastructure type project, that's crucially the starting point. Failure of that, and I think you really will struggle further down the line. So there's a great deal of starting there. Equally, moving on, and I'll come on to a bit more about this, then the consortium was set up, then the John Bunyan boat, which I mentioned before, which is at the Great River Ooze section, was launched. So things started to take off. And as you can see from that, the trust began to sort of evolve over time into something a little bit more strategic, a little bit more fundamental for that region, and more credible within the framework of how it's going to work. And more recently, of course, there's the new boats plan for Milton Keynes, and I'll come on to that later. So you can see the protracted timeline that exists when it comes to projects like this, and I think it's vital that one goes through this sort of idea before you can really come up with credible scheme. So this is an early example, I suppose, of the waterway route, showing the alignment of the railway route, and that route is at the moment starting to emerge as another credible line, just as you would imagine, so back in competition with the railways, one would say, but actually not, because they're fulfilling different functions now, so that there is a recognition that travel is important, but there's also wider recognition, the value now of being able to create open space, waterways, as a means of travel, as well as a means of leisure. So I don't think the competition now is the same. The only competition we've got is for space. And of course, that's the area when it comes to the detail that we're going to have to really look at, and particularly where Richmond Station lies, which is just sort of, I think it's just sort of west of the M1. One can see that the corridor there is quite narrow, and one has to work out how to negotiate a waterway through sections like that. But nevertheless, it is in no way not possible. So working through to the consortium partners. Now, this is something that really is a how it works, how the structure of the trust operates. This is a consortium of partners. It brings together groups of people. The trust itself is the great facilitator of all of this. But there you have different bodies involved. They meet on a twice a year. There's a group, a meeting of minds of the consortium to come together to look at the progress, to see how things are progressing. And with the consortium, and if you look at the slide, you can see that the level of expertise of each of those bodies brings to this waterway park, which is, again, this is the sort of thing that works. If you look at the environmental agency, you've got a flood management plan. They're looking at the ways, in fact, this waterway can benefit them in the way that they can move water around the region during times of drought and during times of excess storage and recharge. So there's an awful lot of work that they're doing, and at the moment the trust is working very closely with the environmental agency as part of our phase 2 design to see whether in fact we can create a much stronger link there in developing a waterway which fulfills a number of functions as well. Then we move on to the local authorities, and as I said, we've got Central Bedfordshire, Milton Keynes, and the Bedford Borough Council, big partners in the process, planning, tourism, looking at ways they can support the project, giving us the support that they can through the political framework, and how the acceptance of the scheme can then move through a much wider remit of the programme. Equally, then we've got the South East Midlands Local Enterprise Partnership, SLM. This is a particularly important partnership to develop, one that when developing major infrastructure crucially gives you the link to the strategic element, and also the links to funding as well for sort of developing ideas. And the LEP, as you can imagine, is involved very much with the East-West Corridor studies, development within that study area, and very much more on I'll come on to it later, but the Oxford CAM ARC, which is something that people may have heard about, which is this rather large project that the government's in some ways moving towards, but there have been some issues recently about that. And then we have our partners in the Internal Drainage Board, and they help us with the waterways, the local drainage issues, and how the waterway can operate across those waterway features, so that we can develop better, if anything, more understanding of just how much water can be moved safely, given the fears that potentially you could create with development and floodplains, whereas this is not about that. This is about a park and how the park can facilitate a region in its development and how it can grow around that park. So huge expertise that comes through. And I can just mention also the Canal and River Trust. Of course, they provide the expertise in the design and the construction of it and the procurement of it and how it could operate. And So we're not clearly there yet, but these are the sorts of partners that contribute enormously to the ideas. And so, I mean, I've already touched upon the benefits, but you know, where do you start with the benefits? I mean, there is just so many to consider. I mean, it's got one of the latter stages of working within the government on developing projects, major projects, was how you could link that with well-being. How could you create a place for people to live without destroying that place? So what are the benefits of creating cycleways that would harness that environment? How would you attract or encourage walking in that area, so that you create that sort of last mile link where in the past people would tend to drive that mile? Why don't we create an environment, safe environment for people to walk, to travel to school, to travel to leisure? All those sorts of facilities have an enormous impact and can reduce quite considerably traffic volume and speeds once you do the planning correctly. And also we're looking for, I mean, we talk about cycling, but generally the word sustainable transport and how you can create alternative means of travel, and cycling just being one of them. But you've also got the waterway itself, so you've got a number of opportunities there for people to travel across that waterway and travel through it, and boats and canoes and whatever form they want. And the two lakes that are created as a result of it are already starting to show potential in waterway sports. So a great shift in understanding. And a particular area as well, one that strikes me as, when it comes to infrastructure, is the recognition that the ecology matters, and that what you're doing is actually benefiting the wildlife in that corridor, the habitat. You're stripping away sometimes what would look like open country, but in fact, when you create a park, a waterway park, you're actually removing intoxication of it by pesticides and herbicides, and you're creating a much more safer environment for wildlife to flourish. And this is the sort of environment that will do that. Governments have given us, or have come up with terms around that, and looking at projects from a different perspective, in that it's not just about the business case, which is right, but it's also about the natural capital, the asset value from an environmental and ecology perspective that project can give back to the community that's had to essentially, you know, live with a bit of infrastructure, roadway or whatever. So you are in a way in a partnership with them, in that you're saying, yes, we're going to create an infrastructure, but also we're going to put back something. And one of the things that struck me, particularly in the latter part of the career, was there was more awareness because of more understanding. We're saying, well, actually, it's not just about planting 1,000 or 1,000,000 trees. It's about planting those trees in the right place, and planting the right trees, and also maybe not planting the trees, and encouraging the habitat. So all those sorts of understanding that an engineer working on a project wouldn't know, whereas bringing in partners around other nature partnerships, they can give you that level of expertise and actually help you create projects that can work. And so hugely important benefit that this project brings. Equally, as mentioned before, with the environmental agency, this area has tremendous potential for flood management, called flood risk management, but actually this is about the movement of water as well, and the way that water can be used to provide a facility as well as an attraction. And the two together, working side by side, can really change the way a project looks. And this is one good example of just how well that works. And then we've looked at, mentioned before, the East-West study, which is the Oxford Milton Keynes, Cambridge arc. This is a fundamental look at the region. Government of looking at how they can build communities along this arc. There's been talk of huge numbers of properties, over 1 million new homes along this arc, and new roads, new one, and to build more infrastructure around the environment as well. So there's a great deal, and this arc sits in a part of that, of this project. The Waterway sits in a part of that arc on the A421 link, and it's also one that probably is a very important part of it, given the level of involvement that's already taken place. So another good example of what that does, and as I said before, along with the flood risk management, you're future-proof in the water supplies transfer, and also the way that you can control flood in that area. So benefit-wise, it just goes on. There are so many that you could talk about. As with all projects, you've got to come up with an economic evaluation of it, and this was done fairly early on by the consultant reports, and you can see from their findings, and you can read the full report. It is actually on our website if you wanted to. Very lengthy document, incredibly thorough, looks at enormous benefits that this project brings, and there are some headlines for you. And more than 5,000 homes, particularly in the Marston Vale area, and the potential for employment and the additional local spend which it will bring to the area over the next 20 years through tourism, through attractions, through services, through utilities, tremendous amount, potentially with an extra 700, up to 800,000 visitors a year, with an extra £7 million spend a year in that region. So fantastic benefits. And if you look at that, it's what they call the CBR 2.6. If you're building a road, a railway, you would be delighted with that figure. And that's the sort of level of benefit that this project will provide in its return to that region. So in terms of economic value and the benefits it brings, you can't see anything that could stand in its way. So what have we done? We've achieved something on its way. We've gained recently the support of the Water Resources of East, which is really down to the water transfer side of things. Talked about the phase 1 flood management study. This is done by Peter Brett Associates, and this is a study that was undertaken. Again, it's on our website if people would want to see it. Sets out early feasibility of the way this scheme could operate, how it could integrate, how it could be built potentially through the topography of it, and looking at the constraints of where some of the engineering difficulties would arise. And there's already been talk about this waterway lift down by Brogba Hill, and that's in itself is a tremendous opportunity. Somebody to come up with an innovation idea that will create something as a feature for the project. But again, the studies looked at this, looked at the way it can be done. We've also recently now had approval, and this is from funding from the Water Resource, how phase 2 of the scheme, and this is, if you look at the transitional stages of a program, you're going through your economic evaluation, you're going through your benefit analysis, you're looking at your phase 1 outline design, you're looking at how the governance of the project is operating, you're looking at how the local terrain and the local perspective works. And then you're moving across another time zone into more detailed analysis of the flood of the project. And phase 2 is due to start. It was due to start, I understand, in the early part of 2020, but it has been delays, partly because of the restrictions around COVID and partly because of the resources. But that is changing, and there is now real excitement that the phase 2 study will go ahead, and that will give the board, the trust, a greater understanding of the degree of difficulty that this project can overcome in developing the next stage. It's also about contributing to the environmental agency and working on planning for the green space and the natural capital, as I talked about, across the Arc. And this is a big area now of the project. So we're looking at phase 2 feasibility, we're looking at phase 2 detailed design, we're also looking at the natural capital asset value and the value of return that it will give us in relation to community and the relationship to the project. And I think those are two very important areas now where the trust is moving in to take this to the next level. How it will work, and this is just a very quick snapshot of where we are. I think it's important to mention too that when you are dealing with a project of this magnitude, and we're talking of considerable sums of money, you look at it from a strategic level, from a delivery side of things, but you also take the opportunity at local level delivery, where the route is defined, where the opportunity arises to build something within that route that meets the standards and will be future-proof for it. So where do you do that, and how do you do it? And these are the sorts of things, and we've had a culvert built on the A421 already, and there are other potentials, particularly around Marston Vale and the development, the waterside development there, and the commercial park in Bedford as well. So we're looking at building sections within those developments, and that in a way gives a solution to the overall strategic objective of the scheme, and that gives the funders more foresight in the way this project is moving. And I think that's the important sign of a successful project of this size. So we've done some really, within the trust itself, you've got some tremendous work going on at the moment on the marketing side of things, and you can look on the website to see this new the new map that's been developed, which takes you through the route, takes you through all of the constraints, gives you an explanation as to what's going on and how it is. And it's a fabulous insight into the way the project is looking and where it's going. And that's really in essence what the success of this will be. So I talked briefly about the natural capital and the way that this will work. And there is a figure there that stands out. There's £2.3 billion of asset value. And it's something that when you work in major infrastructure, is something you look at as the way is cradle to grave. What's the cost of building the project, but also what's the value of the project as it grows in time, and how much effort is required to keep it maintained and to restore it. So all of those are factored in. And when you look at it from a natural capital perspective, some of the natural environment can work in your favour in doing that. And that's one of the benefits, I think, of the way that this can work, in the sense of how the mapping process that's currently underway can develop such an idea. And we're involved, and the trust at the moment is involved with the government in relation to the Oxford-Cambridge Arc in the spatial planning side of things, to see exactly how the Waterway fits in with their plans for community development and local development in that area. So there's a tremendous inroads there at a very high strategic level, which will no doubt in time come through as a very valued piece of work. And just move us on, talking about the Oxford-Cambridge infrastructure plan. There's not a great deal more to say about the timing of it, how it works, but clearly as an infrastructure idea, and one that's gathered a tremendous amount of interest over the last few years, the Waterway Park has a great opportunity to become much more integral in that process. I'll just take us on to that. And this is some prospectus guides that have been produced by the government and the East of England consortium that are working on this. And this is an economic perspective. And in that you can see how reference is made to the value of the Waterway Park. Tremendous achievement to get recognition in such a high level document, and one that is embedded then within the process and will always then feature when it comes to planning, negotiation, developments, and as a reference guidance. So in a way it shows just the importance of understanding how a project works, is that it's yes, it's local, yes, it's operational, yes, it delivers at a local level, but also it fulfills a great deal more across a region in a strategic manner. And I think that's the very clear distinction that you get from this particular waterway. I just wanted to quickly recap as well, in that within the trust there is a team, as you said, the board of members of the trust chaired by Jane, and it brings together a number of groups as well. And I should just mention that one of the groups involved in that is the Programming and Planning and Technical Advice Group, and that's a subgroup to the board, and that's the subgroup that's progressing the business plan, and that's the group that I currently sit on, and support the board in any way I can in helping with the development of this project. Equally, there are subgroups in marketing, in finance, and in strategy, and there are groups of people involved from the trust in driving those forward. So I just wanted to make that clear, that this is a big organisation that's got a central purpose and dedicated people pushing this project on. So when it comes to something like the ARC, as we talk about, that's the sort of thing that is looked at, is to see, well, have you got do you know as a group where you're going? Do you know how you're going to get there? And have you really thought out all of the problems that exist along the way? And by demonstrating that, gives you an opportunity to engage at what is really well, I think one of the country's most strategic plans active at the moment. So I just wanted to finish up quickly on that, and in relation to the way that the projects are working, and to then move along to the other side of the board, which is to do with the, particularly on the Bedford side, the heads of navigation, which is the John Bunyan, which is a longboat that ferries tourists a lot up and down, and very successfully too. But this particular section, and talking about an operational level, this is about looking at creating an existing waterway, a restoration of an existing waterway to encourage wider usage of it, which in turn will feed into the board's primary objective as well, which is about the Waterway Park. So you can see that within the trust, you've got a tremendous amount of work and effort and groups of people involved in developing the operational side of the business as well. And so far, they've managed to undertake some dredging work and looking at developing now a new landing stage, Kempston Mill footbridge, which will allow the John Bunyan to access wider areas of that route and into the Waterway Park as well. But there are constraints on the way, one of them being a bridge, and there are currently proposals to work out whether that can be lifted in some way, or whether there could be an alternative route, or sorry, an alternative way of doing that. So there's a constraint there that's being looked at, and as part of that operational team, they're looking at doing it. And one of the exciting things about that particular section now is that it does now feature as part of the Silver Propeller Challenge. Great for us, great for the trust, because it highlights and elevates the waterway, and gives much more recognition as to what we do and what we represent across that region. So there's a couple of that's an important bit of work that's going on as well, and that's active as we speak. So the John Bunyan community boat, well, there it is, and that operates, as I said, the enterprise operate the function of that, and they are very successful in operating a fairly successful tourist boat system. And unfortunately, as with everywhere else, the last 12 months has not been kind, given that the COVID restrictions obviously have held back a number of this. But one hopes that very soon things will pick up and it will restore itself back to its glory and the way that it operates very, very soon. So you can see the success story carried over 45,000 people in the since 2013. Based on the Great Ooze at Priory Marina, and a historical part of Bedford, dates back to Victorian times, I believe. It's, and as you can see, it's bi-weekly. It's one that you can charter, works with community groups. It could be hired, bit of a promotional thing, and it's a very successful operation in that area, and one that they have many volunteers operating on. And I understand they're always looking for volunteers to join in the success of that project. And more excitingly as well, we've got a new boat been built, and this is called Electra, and this is an electrically powered boat, which is quite innovative. Based at Campbell Wharf, as I mentioned before. This is a new wharf built by Crest Nichols, and is in the centre of Milton Keynes, and well, it provides the valued moorings for the Grand Union Canal, and in itself is the potential for successful tourism cruising machine, that a boat that can offer great service. Again, the restrictions as they are at the moment, there isn't much in the way of passenger transports, but it was hoped that during the latter part of 2021 that this will take off and form a separate arm to the enterprise, and also give valued support and income to the trust as a strategic body too. So tremendous amount of work going on there, and a fabulous piece of work. And just to give you a couple of insights to how this looks, if you haven't already seen one, and you can see the benefits, and they're the volunteers trust activities that take place, and they're always looking, as I said before, for new volunteers. So and the website at the end gives people the opportunity to look at that and to see whether in fact they would find it something that they'd like to be involved in. So there's your website, and look at that, and please do look at this, and do look at the map and the website, and the history behind it, and how the trust is developing, and how through the next 3 years how the Waterway Park will emerge and develop, and one hopes form part of the major feature of that central corridor. And I leave it there. So I hope that's taken you through a journey on where we are and how we're operating, and I'll take any questions. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks very much, Stuart. That really that's interesting. Whilst you were talking, I've had an exchange with our national chair, and he agrees with the point I was making to you beforehand. I think there's a real opportunity for IWA to become involved with and more publicly and very publicly supportive of your project. A lot of us members have known about it for many years when it was in the earlier stages, and it was then just a dream for boaters. But understanding the broader perspectives of it now, in terms of the issues of movement of water, and solving problems of water supply in East Anglia, etc., and that there's a whole load of other things that can help to make this happen, is really encouraging. So we'll move on to the first of the questions that we have, and it was from Jeff Doggett. And will this be operated and, adopted and operated by CRT, EA, or ANO? I guess that's ANO.
Well, I think the intention is the trust will be a major body involved, but the trust itself is a delivering mechanism. So who will take over the ownership of it? I think that will be a test of time, because with these sorts of projects, if you've got a major player that's environmental agency who are transferring water, they may want more of a say in how it's managed. If you've got some of the Waterway Trust who are involved in designing these projects, they may also want to be. So I don't think it's clear yet how the function of it will work once it's built. And I have to say, looking at projects and looking at programs, I think we're a long way off that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of the questions are ones that see this as moving towards a done deal, Stuart, which is right. If only they were in power.
Yes.
From Liz Franklin, we have, and this is a long question, something went right when an underpass for the canal was built into the A421 upgrade from Bedford to the M1. When the 421 was upgraded from the M1 into Milton Keynes, we achieved, shall we say, more limited success, in that the new road was contoured to allow for a future underpass to be driven under at great costs. Are there lessons to be learnt from this?
Yes, yes, there is. And I think it's a good point, because talking earlier about having a credible business case with a clear plan and clear direction, and the influence that you can bring when it comes to major modifications like this particular one on the A421, which I imagine I wasn't involved at the time, I think it was Highways England, is that it does demonstrate that you can advance ideas much more clearly if you've got a good idea of what it is you're doing. I suppose in a way I'm trying to say is that I have been involved in the past where you can create the right infrastructure to facilitate a project that doesn't yet exist, as long as you've got the right foresight and development plans for it. I think in a way, I can recall talking to Jane about this one, there were some lessons to be learnt as to how broad this channel was, and where in fact it could have been better built as a relation to the trust. And I think you're right, lessons are learned, and I think in a way now we take it forward with other opportunities to ensure that we get the right level of infrastructure for projects like this.
We have from Roger Kennedy, how does the industrial warehouse units at Wootton Kempston and the dualling in the A421 affect the timing for the planned route, and will it incur more cost? Yeah,
again, we're in discussion with the groups, the bodies, the developers, and the local planners and the highways authorities and Highways England at an early stage to ensure that the route is protected. I think you know, again, it's a good question, because we spoke about the congested area, and there is a lot of development, industrial development planned in that area, which is narrowing that corridor quite extensively. And in some areas, it might require some of the walkways or the cycleways to move around those developments. But the primary objective is always to retain the waterway, and that through the development is important through this process. So it's a battle, it is, and it's one that we're always aware of. And we're a statutory consultee as part of the planning process, so we do get early engagement with the way that these developments do come alive.
And now we have from Ron Abbott, will the Bedford Milton Keynes link be affected by HS2?
No. I know. no. That it's within the Oxcam arc, and as far as I'm aware, that is not HS2. So no.
Okay, that's good. Most things are. And from Jonathan Buttery, how will you get the money for this?
Yes, well, here we are. That's a good question, because we, and how much does it cost? So how much money do we want? And that's a question that I, working on many infrastructure projects, you start a particular figure, and then you work upwards. And the problem is that you're never quite sure how far up that means you have to go to get something built. The business case always ties you back to something that is deliverable, and I think that's the certain point of it. So funding will come from different sources, the way I see it. You'll have development contributions, you'll have investment levies, local improvement levies, you'll have Section 106 of where it exists, and also from the ARC itself, you'll have funding directed towards it as an offset to the major plans as well. So there's an awful lot of entwined opportunities for funding. And as with all projects, and some of the bigger ones I've been involved in the past, have had many, many different sources of funding associated with a project to make it work. And the pressure then begins to ensure that you meet their financial deadlines. So it's not an easy game to be in now.
There certainly seem to be a lot of beneficiaries from this project, so a lot of negotiation to go. I had from Peter Brunt, he wasn't sure whether or not he saw the local water supply company involved as one of the participants. Is it Anglian Waterways or?
Yes, you've got there are the yes, I mean, we have the internal drainage boards, and we have the Water Resource Authority now recently in part of it, looking mainly at transfer of water supplies. You say the local water companies, I imagine that they will be affiliated or linked to some of the more strategic ones in part of the discussions to do with water flow and water extraction. So they may be fragmented in it, but they will certainly feature within the overall picture.
Is there a major party that you recognise as a water supply company?
I suppose
in the partnership.
Other than, I suppose, the Water Research Authority is the only really big player that as far as we're aware, are involved. But yeah, I think
okay,
that's
interesting. Yeah. Now I have a question. I jumped a couple of questions there because of the way that Zoom works. As somebody who is anonymous, what revenue is raised by the John Bunyan?
Well, as I said, that's a fluctuating picture, given that the last 12 months has probably distorted the overall picture of it. Those figures are available. They're on their website. The enterprise part of the trust that publish their accounts, and I think you can see the income that's generated from that boat travel.
We can probably provide an answer later as to, say, the average non-COVID year income.
Yeah,
some idea.
Get some idea of that.
Okay. How does the water transfer work compared to, say, water passing down the River Ooze from Milton Keynes? Well,
that's a big question, and one that I suppose the hydrologists in the Environmental Agency would be a better place to answer that. But how does it work? It's a process. I mean, the study is called a catchment area study, so they are picking up all water courses, all areas of natural flow in that region. And I think actually on the website, Dave, there is a link to the business plan, to the phase 1 study, which shows all of the network of rivers and waterways that contribute towards this catchment area.
So are we really saying this whole catchment area will become a huge reservoir, whereas at the moment it's a flood issue? My wife and I used to live at Newport Pagnell, and I can remember one of the brooks that feeds the Great Ooze at Newport Pagnell went across a field across the back of our garden, and we can remember watching it gradually creep across the field towards our house at one time. So
Right.
I'm guessing that you've got quite a valuable area of holding water as against simply allowing what happens naturally now to happen and it all go out into the wash.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are facilities in that area where where the water can be stored. I do recall reading the report saying that there would have to be some engineering improvements to do that, because the current facilities simply wouldn't take account of extra flow. So it's not a done deal, and I think in a way it's one that will have some considerable improvements to ensure it does work, particularly on that side that you mentioned.
Interesting question here from William Root. What is the level difference between the Grand Union and the Ooze? I know you did mention a number of locks, because he's asked how many locks there are and will a new water supply will be needed. Well, I think some of that question is answered already in what you've said. But
yes. I did mention at the beginning about the number of locks involved.
Yeah.
And the height difference. I mean, the Brogby Hill, I think we're talking about, there's a 23-metre height difference just to get up that hill. So you're talking, I must admit, I don't have the longitudinal levels to define what the rate of flow or fall is between the two. But given that section of Brogby Hill is so steep, it is considerable.
I now have a question from Brian Elliott. Dredging was undertaken at Kempston End only to find that an old concrete swimming pool was found, so unable to build the landing stage and winding hole there. What's the latest on that situation?
I know. I did attend a meeting recently over that. Yeah, frustrating as it is. Yeah, that's a bit of engineering that needs to be dealt with. I think in a way, the landing stage can't operate fully until that is dealt with. But there's extra cost, there's extra facility to do that. But the plans are to ensure that there is adequate floating facility there. So it's a job in progress, I think, is the best way we can describe that, and we are fully aware of it. Yeah.
Question from one of our Chiltern members here, Hugh Howes. Evening, Hugh. When does the Trust anticipate being able to submit a planning application?
That's a very good question. I think in a way, the overall proposal is, as I said, it's an integrated approach with the A421 corridor and development around it. So there's an awful lot of application work at the moment for Marston Vale developments and the business parks. So, and sections of the canal are built within that. So it's a way off, I think, before we can submit a credible plan application for this. I don't have any dates for that. And I think in a way, before one does that, you are, in terms, in essence,
how does a planning application operate when it goes across so many different
I think in a way, yes. I mean, because when you're working on road infrastructure, you're doing it in different ways. You develop a development consent order which enters into an agreement over a period of time. So you're locked into a time. You've got the transport works, which is the railways approach. And again, this would probably fall in the middle of that anyway, as a recognised scheme, as to see how it would drive. But it would have to go to the three planning authorities.
Yeah. Okay. And one from Derek Hunt. How much will it cost?
Yeah. Well, I said it before, but I would be the last person to give you any indication of the cost of this, given that dealing with some of the bigger projects in the past is that you start at a point and work upwards, and you
I would think the answer is going to be somewhat more than the first estimate.
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, very much so.
And from Nick Hindle, it's great to hear it's a when rather than if. Are there any projected timescales for when it will actually happen?
Yes, well, I said that when you're in a project of this scale and magnitude and across a pretty difficult area, your program is defined by stages. So we are in different stages of the program, really, and I don't think we're really at a stage to say that this is when it's going to be built, because we've still got quite a few areas ahead of us before we can get to that point.
From John Myers, how did the trust manage to become a statutory consultee?
Yeah, I must admit, it was I used the word statutory as a bit of a when I was working in local in government, it's a consultee. So we feature within the planning frameworks as a consultee, whether that's a statutory consultee or whether that's just that we are informed and given the opportunity to contribute. I think it's probably a looser term than statutory.
Have you any idea as to the overall timescale, and what funding do you have in the kitty?
Well, back to the program. I mean, this is a big project. I mean, I wouldn't even begin to give a timeline on this at the moment, other than we've got a 3-year business plan, and that will take us to 2022. And from there, I would have thought, once we've had a detailed design phase done, that we would be in a better position to predict more accurately the timelines for delivery and the interactions with this project. So I think it's a bit too premature at the moment to give that sort of level of detail.
Okay, I think we're more or less at the end of the questions. There was one question there that disappeared, and I'm going to answer it anyway. Yes. Very, very briefly. Somebody asked what my background was. It's our boat going across, doing part of a convoy going across the River Mersey. I won't say anything more about it than that. Stuart, that really is, it's a very interesting project, and it's one that the IWA would like to get much closer to and have a significant involvement in terms of doing whatever we can to publicise and move this forward. Whatever corridors of power that we have influence in, I think we're interested to be involved. I think was it Jane? You said your chair.
Jane Hamilton.
Yeah, I'd very much like to make contact with her, if possible, fairly soon now, and we'll take it from there. Thank you for everybody for your attendance. I think Jeff Doggett has come in with a number which looks to me to be quite optimistic. 43 locks and plus probably a tunnel for the hill. It has to be a 100 million project. I think that's a starting figure, not a final figure, but yeah, okay. Stuart, thanks very much indeed. I'm going to close down. No more questions. I won't be asking any more questions now. Thank you very much indeed. Anybody, if anybody you know that wanted to join was unable to, Stuart has agreed that we can turn this into a YouTube webinar, so it will go up in about 2 weeks' time onto YouTube under the IWA TV banner. Again, Stuart, thanks very much indeed.
Okay, thank you, Dave.